Nightmare on the MaryAnn. 5 travelers were on board a ship called the MaryAnn, sailing from their world home in Brazil to the New World. 2 of them are men, the other 3 are women. One man, named John, had a mustache. The other one, George, was big and burly with thick, dark brown hair. Susan was the one with the ponytail, and Harriet had on the cowgirl boots. The last one, her name was Catherine, or Cat for short. That's what her friends called her. She was shy, short, but extremely tough. Along the way to this new world, these travelers had heard of something called the Devil's Gully. The reason for this name is because in this remote part of northern Brazil is a mysterious legend about a creature. This malevolent creature was told that it took the form of a little girl, and it had a hidden stash of riches. But in order to obtain this riches, you must first complete a dangerous challenge. So far, no one has ever completed it. They all have died. Of course, since they were all risk takers, they decided to try it, even though they knew full well of the consequences. For weeks, they sailed through the Caribbean, only to stop for breaks in Haiti, Jamaica, and a few places in Mexico. It took a couple of weeks until they stopped at a remote part in the Caribbean. It was very unkempt, lots of plants and wildlife strewn around. In the midst of this mess was a shelter. It stood about 15 feet tall and looked like a warehouse. The 5 travelers looked at each other and approached the building. The vine-covered shack loomed over them in a menacing manner, beckoning them to enter. John took the lead. He turned the doorknob. The door creaked as John opened it. Inside, it looked as if the door hadn't been opened in years. Every single item in the immediate room looked as if it had been touched by dust. There were ancient-looking shelves, rotting wood, and tons of vases. All over the room, covered in darkness, except for the light coming from the doorway that John had occupied. Everyone walked in and took a look around. Susan tried to find the light switch, but didn't prevail. That's when George noticed a lamp. He turned it on, and the room flashed with light, temporarily blinding everyone. It was an old-looking lamp, perhaps from the 18th century. That's when George noticed a door, smack dab in the middle of the room, not attached to anything besides the door frame. It was standing up as if prepared to be opened. John looked it over, scratching the end of his mustache. "Nothing's attached," John said. Harriet and Cat were the only ones who didn't speak. "Open it, George," said John. George revolved to the spot where John was facing the door. "Wait, before I open it, I need someone to turn off the light." Even though he was certain the door would still be in invisible existence, Harriet turned off the light. Everyone was shocked at the sound of the door. It disappeared. Immediately, she turned on the light and told George not to open it, for it looked dangerous. George took no notice of her and reached his hand out to the doorknob. He took it and turned. The door slowly glided open. No one could believe their eyes when they saw what was inside. A rotting body covered in flies and dried blood. A horrible, deathly smell followed everyone's noses outside of the door. Everyone choked and gasped in disbelief. Just as George was about to close the door, the ceiling broke under the weight of the body of a little girl, hanging from her neck in a noose. Everyone screamed and George slammed the door. He warily opened the door again a few minutes later to find the body and noose missing. He nervously closed the door behind him and looked around. There, at the top of the stairs, on the left, there stood the little girl, fully awake and alive. She yawned, and everyone backed up with fear. "I want waffles," she said. Suddenly, everyone's facial expression changed from sheer horror to ones of disbelief. "What?" Harriet asked. The little girl's expression turned angry. "Make me waffles!" she demanded. Everyone jumped with fright. George was the first one to speak. "Oh, okay. Calm down. I'll make you some waffles." At this, the little girl smiled and walked away. George ran to where he thought the kitchen was. There was nothing, save for a few ceramic cups and a big bag of sugar. While he searched, he thought to himself, "Why am I looking through the house for waffles or waffle mix? We should be getting out of here." But he searched anyway, for a subconscious fear of what the little girl might do. She wasn't normal, that was a fact. Whether she was human or not, that was the question. George arrived back at the group with no success. For the first time since they got there, they had a conversation. But it was unintelligible conversation. One might have been talking about kittens, while the other one was shouting about wrestlers, and one was to respond with a Shakespearean quote about Romeo and Juliet. Finally, after several minutes of confusion, they reached the same question. How do we get out of here? The only reason they were at this island, besides the fact that the ship ran out of fuel, was that they wanted fortune. But the group already reached the conclusion that it wasn't worth it. John became the leader, only because everyone was too scared of the island to not obey him. He demanded that everyone try to find some oil for the boat. Flares, food, water, and maybe riches. Night fell very quickly, and by the time everyone gathered back together, only 2 things were found. John didn't find any riches. Harriet was fond of the food idea. George gave up his task to look for the food with Harriet. Susan couldn't find any boat oil. Cat search failed, so they might as well go to bed thirsty. To avoid possible death, Susan and George reasoned that they should spend a night on the boat. As much work as that sounded like, it was also a very good idea. It was only when Cat closed the door for the last time on the boat that she saw the supernatural girl in the middle of the living room, face demonic and bloody, pointing outside. But she was only there for a second.